Hi everyone, we'll give it another minute. There's quite a few people still joining. Once everyone seems in, we'll kick off. All right, we might as well get into it. I'm conscious of time and everyone's time is valuable tonight. And thanks everyone for joining us. But thanks everyone, on a Monday night. I hope the start of the week's going well for you. My name's Shane Hart. I'm the Assistant Principal for Resilience and Wellbeing here at CRC Sydenham, and welcome to our very first, I guess, of a series of wellbeing webinars that the wellbeing team, we've sort of come up with, and our fantastic psychologists have put together for us. I'll introduce them in a moment. So also joining us tonight is David O'Brien, who is the Director of Community Engagement, and our three fantastic psychologists on site. We've got Shrey Coghlan, Isabel DeLuca, and Jess Caday. So I'm going to throw to Isabel, who's going to kick things off for us. But hope you enjoy the webinar. This will be recorded for you to also watch back at a later time. So thanks everyone, and over to you, Isabel.
Thanks, Jane. Tonight we're going to be presenting on adolescent development. So the presentation will go for about 20 minutes, and then we've planned to have to answer some questions at the end, which will go for about 10 minutes. So feel free to ask any questions as we go along. You can just put your questions in the Q&A box. So you'll see that just at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get as many as we can at the end. The presentation is based on the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, who's a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA School of Medicine. We're just going to start with talking about some myths and facts tonight about adolescent development, and then Shrey will talk about the adolescent brain and what's different in the older teenage years. Then Jess will talk about some take-home strategies for parents and an acronym that Dan Siegel has created, which is Essence, and then we'll move on to those Q&As. So I'm just going to present some statements. They're going to be a myth or a fact, and I'd just like you to have a think about whether you think they're a myth or a fact as I go along, and I'll present the answers as I go through. So the first one is just, is risk-taking behaviour and engaging in new and uncertain experience a normal part of adolescent development? So what do you think about this one? Do you think it's a myth or a fact? Let's give you a minute. So this one's a fact. So adolescents tend to have an urge to take risks and to try new things, which is due to enhanced dopamine release. So what that means is when an adolescent engages in activities that they that are either a risk-taking activity or a new experience, the dopamine release, so the feel-good chemical that gets released from engaging in that activity, is higher. They also have a lower dopamine baseline, which means that they can become bored easily and can tend to engage in risk-taking behaviour because of that as well. They also engage in hyper-rationalisation, which Shrey will talk a bit more about. So it's important to remember that it's helpful to support adolescents with finding helpful ways for them to address their needs to take risks, and Jess will talk a bit more about strategies. Okay, the next one is adolescents tend to be more emotional during this phase of their lives due to their hormones. So I'll just get you to have a think whether you think this one might be a myth or a fact. So this one's a myth. So adolescents tend to be more emotional due to their brain development rather than their hormones. So it is a bit of a myth that people tend to believe that it's due to hormones, but that it is due to brain development, and it is what we're wanting you to take away from tonight is the role the brain plays in the behaviour and emotions of teens. That's the next one, Sheree, thanks. The next one, the next myth or fact that I'd like you to have a think about is adolescents should be turning more to their parents over their friends and peers. So do you think this one might be a myth or a fact? So this one's a myth. It's normal for adolescents to seek out and turn to their friends and peers rather than their parents. So you might have noticed this with your own child, that they are tending to turn more to their friends rather than mainly coming to you, which is probably different to what they were previously doing. This is a normal and natural part of adolescent development. And part of this is due to their need to be a part of and to fit in with the group. And it's an important developmental need for them that should be met. And meeting this need helps with their well-being and their happiness, and it helps with ensuring that they don't eventually miss or have any delays with their social development. Turning more to friends is also the beginning of a process towards them establishing more independence. Although your relationship may have changed somewhat, your role as their parents is still really important. It's just different. So parents may feel like they can feel like they may need to back off or back away from their teen because they might be feeling that they're not needed anymore, but that's not necessarily the case. And actually, teens are really needing their parents during this time. So yeah, helpful to remember that. So the last myth or fact we've got is parents should make all the important decisions for their teenage child. So get you to have a think about this one as well, whether you think it's a myth or a fact. So this one's a myth. It's helpful for adolescents to be interdependent rather than completely dependent or completely independent. So there is a misconception that perhaps teenagers aren't ready or they aren't old enough to establish some independence. So it's actually helpful for them. It's important to remember that sometimes they're needing space, they need opportunities to make their own decisions and establish some level of independence while still being guided and supported by their parents. So an example might be, allowing them to go out with their friends, but it's okay to have an agreed time for them to return or to guide them with what's kind of reasonable. Moving from dependence to independence can also take some time, and it's a process. We don't have to go from being dependent to independent kind of overnight, and that's where adolescents are at. They're going through this process, and it's a really important process with skill development and preparing for adulthood as well. So I'm now just going to pass over to Sheree, who's going to talk about the teenage brain and how that differs to the brain of a child and an adult. Thanks, Sheree.
Thank you. So as Isabel said, it's not about raging hormones that accounts for the differences that you see in teenagers during these years. It's also not about them having an immature brain, which is probably something you might have heard as well, like the brain's not fully developed, which is true, but it's not so useful to think of it as being immature because they're actually right where we want them to be at this stage. A better way to think of it is that the brain is remodeling at the moment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what this remodeling actually is, what's actually happening in the brain. So when we're talking about remodeling, we're actually talking about structural changes that are happening in the teenager's brain. One of those is called pruning, which is when the old cells are actually pruned off, cells that we don't use anymore, the brain gets rid of them. So we're in childhood, our brain creates lots and lots of new brain cells and new connections between these brain cells. And when we go into our adolescent years, we actually prune off those things that aren't being as used as much. So when I say pruning, it's much like a plant, pruning off, how you prune a plant. And when we're talking about what is used or not used, The things that we're talking about are, behaviors that we engage in a lot, or thoughts that we think a lot, tend to be the pathways and the connections that stay. And it's the things that we're not using as much that might get pruned away. So a good example of this is, say, if a young child learns a second language in their early childhood, maybe they're looked after by their grandparents and they learn a second language. But as they go to school, they don't really speak that language as much anymore. And into their teenage years, they're not really speaking that language, that the brain cells and the pathways associated with that language development are more likely to be pruned off. And that's why some people, they say, I used to know how to speak Italian, but I don't know how to do it anymore. I can only understand a little bit now. So these changes that we're talking about, this pruning is happening in the yellow part of the brain here. Which we call the cerebral cortex. So that's the thinking part of the brain. So that's the part of the brain that solves problems, helps us plan, helps us do maths and, do all sorts of difficult equations. It's the part that keeps us balanced and keeps our emotions in check as well. The other part of the brain, this pink part here, the lower parts of the brain, they're also going through structural changes as well. And the pink part of the brain is actually the emotional part. And in adolescence, it's quite different to, say, in childhood or in adulthood. For example, brain scans of teenagers, if they're shown a neutral face, like a photo with a neutral face, these parts here, these pink parts here, activate and light up, but that doesn't happen with adults when they're shown a person with a neutral facial expression. So as you might be beginning to understand, the brain's actually going through a lot of changes in the teenage years. They're integrating new abilities, and there's real structural changes that are happening. Because there's so many changes happening at the moment, the brain's more likely to be thrown off balance. So going back to the remodeling example, when you're remodeling a home, it's far more likely that things are going to go wrong, like a pipe is going to burst or the electrics are going to trip. Same thing with the teenager's brain. Because a lot of the changes are happening in this thinking part of the brain, that's where things are going to go off balance. So that kind of explains why we might see more emotional responses in teenagers. So these parts here, these emotional parts are being activated, and the thinking part of the brain is not as good at rationalizing and working through problems because it's literally under construction at the moment. So the other thing that's happening, just get to my next slide. The other thing that's happening in the brain at the moment that's really important is, as Isabel mentioned, the enhanced dopamine release that's happening for teenagers. So dopamine is the feel-good chemical in the brain. And when you have enhanced dopamine release, what that means is that you're more likely to be impulsive. So, and when I'm talking about impulsiveness here, I'm talking about more likely to take action without thinking of the consequences and more likely to take risks. And this is what all parents of teenagers fear, I think, and get worried about, this increased impulsiveness, because you can see it in them. But it's also a positive as well, because it's an essential part of development. Teenagers need to start taking more risks in their lives in a safe way so that they can progress in their development. And Jess will be talking about this a bit more in the next slides and giving you some strategies for helping guide them to do that in a safe and supported way. So the final thing that's happening associated with this enhanced dopamine release is that young people engage in what Dr. Dan Siegel refers to as hyper-rational thinking. And this is this tendency to miss the big picture and place more weight on the benefits of a situation rather than really going through the potential consequences of something. And I think a lot of adults might be able to relate to this when we think back to our teenage years. I know sometimes I do this. I might think back to something that I did when I was a teenager and think, wow, that was actually a really dangerous thing that I did. And as an adult, you can't really relate to it and you don't know why you did it. But the fact is you did it because you had a teenage brain. And I think that might be helpful to think through our young people, your children, the people we work with, that they're doing these things because, their brains are geared to do that. So now I'm just going to throw to Jess, because she's going to talk about some strategies for supporting a teenager with managing their life when these things are happening in their brain. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks so much, Sheree. So as we've just heard, the teenage brain is experiencing a lot of changes on the inside, and what's happening inside the brain also has a big impact on what we see on the outside. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking what this development actually looks like from a kind of an outside perspective. And as we've mentioned, Dan Siegel has done a lot of work looking into the adolescent brain. And if there's one thing Dan Siegel likes, it's a good acronym. So he's given us a handy little acronym to help us to kind of conceptualize some of these big changes that we're noticing in terms of adolescent behaviour. And for each of these 4 aspects that he is going to cover in the acronym, we're going to look at the upsides and the downsides of each, as well as some strategies that you can use to support your young people as they're experiencing these changes. And the little acronym that he's given us is ESSENCE. So it's very handy that we can look at the essence of adolescence together. And he's also provided this lovely quote, which I think summarises a lot of what we've heard already, which is that adolescence is not a period of being crazy or immature, but it's an essential time of emotional intensity, of social engagement, and of creativity. So looking at this acronym, to start with, the letters ES from ESSENCE stand for emotional spark. And this refers to the way that young people experience emotions in more enhanced and intense ways. This emotional spark enables young people to have as the benefits the kind of the passion and the energy to take on the world and to live life to the full. But we can also see that there are some real challenges to this emotional spark. We can see young people experiencing mood swings and emotional roller coasters, which can be really hard and confusing for young people, but also a challenge for those who are supporting them. So what can we do to help our young people who are experiencing this change in this emotional spark? As an adult in your young person's life, you can support them in this time by, I think, just understanding, as Sheree said, that this is a really natural part of their development and demonstrating empathy to that. So that means listening, acknowledging their feelings and showing them that you understand. If your child is on an emotional roller coaster, they can't just stop the ride and jump off. But you can be a really massive support to them by riding on that roller coaster with them, kind of journeying with them through those ups and those downs, by listening, by role modeling calm, and by helping them to find ways to regulate their emotions. The next part of our acronym is the SE, and that stands for social engagement. And in adolescence, as Isabel mentioned earlier, we start to notice that teens are turning more towards their peers and kind of away a little bit from their parents and their carers. This is a really natural process, and we call this individuation, where a young person is starting to build their own identity away from their parents and family. So there are some real upsides to this change, and that's that young people are learning to seek, connect, and maintain supportive relationships in their lives. We know that relationships are really important. Relationships are associated with medical well-being, with mental health, with living a long life, and with overall happiness. But the downside of some of this change can be that as we begin to kind of prioritise the need to belong to a peer group, young people may be more susceptible to things like peer pressure in order to stay in the group. So how can we help? Well, you can help by providing space for your young person to develop and enhance positive peer group connections in healthy ways by encouraging them to hang out with friends, maybe play some group sports or games or chat online. But at the same time as encouraging those social connections, we don't want parents and carers to just back out of the picture completely. Like Isabel said, it's more about interdependence and not total kind of independence away from parents. Building a trusting and compassionate relationship with your child can really help them to feel safe and secure as they work out who they want to be in the world. And it means that they know that they can turn to you if things don't feel okay or when they have to make tough choices about who they're going to choose to engage with. Moving into our next letter of this acronym, we've got N, and that N stands for novelty seeking. And novelty seeking means basically looking for something new. When we experience something new and exciting, as Sheree mentioned before, our brains light up with dopamine, that's that feel-good chemical. But the difficulty around this is that things that can seem new and exciting aren't always good for us. And sometimes novelty seeking might lead us to take risks that could result in getting hurt. So on the bright side, having courage, having interest to step out of your comfort zone and to try out new things that are unknown or uncertain is a really important step in development, and it helps us to navigate the world. It helps us to work out our goals and work towards them. So how can we support young people with this? Well, as a parent, you can support your child by allowing and encouraging your young person to make their own choices and try new things, even if that means making some mistakes, but to do so while remaining really supportive and available for when they need you. So you could guide your child to positive outlets for their passions. You could introduce them to people and clubs with similar interests. You could engage them and their friends in exciting adventures of their choosing. But if you feel unsure about something new that they're looking to try out, having a non-judgmental conversation about the pros and the cons of an activity or a decision can really help your child to make choices about engaging in novel or even risky behaviours in a way that is a lot more healthy and safe. And finally, as we look at the last component of our acronym, the CE, that stands for creative exploration. And this refers to adolescents' growing interest in exploring new paths, working out what they are thinking about things, and even challenging the status quo. The benefits of this is that in exploring and challenging the way of the world, young people can come up with new and innovative ways of doing things. They can develop their problem-solving skills, and this can show ingenuity, courage, and creativity. The difficulty here, though, is that exploring and pushing against some of the accepted boundaries can be quite disorienting and stressful. And a young person might start seeing that things in the world are actually a lot more complex and maybe a lot less rosy than they had previously imagined. So you can help them as they're exploring this new area of life by providing an open space to hear their ideas and talk through their questions and their worries. And don't worry, you don't need to know all of the answers, but by just being an interested and a supportive listener, you can be such a help when your young person is working out how the world works and how they in particular fit into that. So those are the four kind of components of the Essence acronym that Dan Siegel unpacked for us now. Kind of landing on that idea of exploring questions and answers, we're actually going to move into our time of question and answers now, looking at the questions that you've sent through. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to hand back over to Sheree and Isabel to unpack some of that for us.
Hello, sorry, I've just turned off the screen sharing so that we can speak as people. I think it might be helpful. Isabel, did you have a question to answer? Did one come through for you on your end?
No, I'm just having a look. I was just going to suggest if anyone has any questions now that we're finished up, yeah, add it into the Q&A. No one else will be able to see the questions but us.
Yep.
So we'll just check if there's any.
So I have one question, and maybe Isabel, you can keep an eye on if anything else comes through as well. Yeah. So I think one person has asked, when does it end? Which is a really good question as a parent to be thinking, when does this, because it is a difficult time, and you've just heard about the brain changes and all those things that the young person's going through and why. And I think it's good to know that there is an end point for when the brain kind of starts integrating a bit better. So the process really starts at the beginning of adolescence from about age 12 to up to age 24, but definitely during that time you see changes. In particular, what you'll see is changes in how flexible your child or young adult is in their thinking, that you should start to see flexibility in their thinking, more ability to stop and pause before taking those risks. So yeah, there is an end point in terms of definitely by age 24 or so, the brain's finished going through that part of its development. The brain actually is always what we call plastic, so the brain is always has potential to change. But yeah, they also, it'll be finished by about that time, and you'll be seeing more flexibility in their thinking. Isabel, did you want to take another question? Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I'm just having a read of it. Okay. So the question was, how do you get through to your child that exercise is good for their mental health? Okay, so thanks for the question. Yeah, David, did you want to answer it? Is that what that was?
No, I was just pointing out that we're going to answer it live, but perhaps if one of the psychologists has anything to point to that, and maybe Shane or I could have a go at our experience, and Shane, with his extensive knowledge of physical education, might be able to dive in there too.
I'm happy to answer that one as well. I'll start with that one. My off mute, yeah. So I'd say one thing, exercise probably is part of balance in life as well. And I think one thing that in all the time I've been here at Sydenham that I've worked on a lot with students in VCE is understanding balance, and understanding that you do the best when you have more balance in your life. And that includes having exercise. And so I try and talk to them in a way that they don't feel like they're being lectured to, but also that just kind of to help them understand that you want them to have balance. And I'd say that also should include having time with their friends, and maybe there's going to be more buy-in from your teenager if you acknowledge that part. Yep, time with your friends, but also, you know, having balance in terms of physical movement. Physical movement will help with if they want to do well in school and in life, and managing their stress levels, to understand how, you know, physical movement has a role in that, and has a role in the general balance that they need to kind of achieve success. Jess or Isabel, did you have anything else you wanted to say or add to what I've just said?
If it's okay, I might just jump in, and I just wanted to say that I think this is a great point, because I think that you're so right. I think that physical activity is a really important thing. Communicating that can be difficult. But I think that when we're looking at physical activity for a young person, research kind of indicates that about 30 minutes a day is a great goal. And if we can find physical activities that they enjoy, that can be a really positive step in the right direction. So I know for me, I was not an athletic adolescent, but I like going for walks or taking the dog for a walk. So I think finding physical activities that don't necessarily have to fit that norm of what exercise looks like. It doesn't have to be at a gym. It doesn't have to be a really intense kind of sport, but doing something that gets your body moving and something that you enjoy is going to naturally kind of enhance your motivation for that. So I'd encourage you to have some conversations about what sort of physical activity they might enjoy, or if not, what sort of physical activity might be the least bad option for them as well. So that would be what I have to add to that.
I might jump in there. Thanks, Jess. The other one, you can also talk about how it's a good way to just meet new people and just enhancing those connections, and with general mental health, exercise can help decrease stress and anxiety and a whole range of mental health issues, but also help with sleep as well. And obviously, sleep's a big part of mental health as well, and that's one of our next webinars that's coming up, is about sleep. But exercise just generally helps your mood, and I think, as Jess said, just finding something that your child's interested in, and that's going to go a long way. If they can take a bit of ownership of selecting the activity, what are they interested in, helping facilitate that, that's a really good way to do it. And at school, we got a lot of different clubs and even the SAC sports that students can get involved with, so you can encourage them to get involved with that. But also, obviously, externally, we've got different connections, different organisations that we can help link in with if that's what they're interested in. But I think the main one, you just talk about the benefits of exercise. It makes you feel better. It makes you more energetic. It helps your general physical health, obviously, but obviously it's good for feeling good about yourself and increasing those connections and having those social connections is critical, and that social health, which impacts on your mental health as well.
Can I just say one more thing, actually? I know we're pressed for time, Shane. We do need to finish up. But, it's a lot of students and parents perhaps believe that a young person might need to stop doing their sports in VCE. It's something that we come across a little bit. I'd really encourage you not to do that, and not encourage the teenager not to do that, because that's, as I was talking about with balance, I think it's really important that if they can, they keep up their sport when they're doing year 11 and 12.
Yeah. Just quickly, I was just going to add, the question was also about kind of talking to them about doing exercise. I think something that's coming to mind is also about if they're reluctant, kind of how do you respond to that? I guess I'm just thinking about being understanding and listening to their concerns in a non-judgmental way. I think that's a really important part of kind of talking to them as well during this time. Yeah, if they're a bit reluctant. I think, David, did you have anything to add? I don't know. Or was that it?
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. I was just going to second. I think Shane picked up on the social element of physical activity, and I suppose that whilst a lot of our students are linked with a lot of the local sporting clubs, whether it's Aussie Rules, soccer. I know there's some martial arts groups around that students are involved with, and they find that really gives them a sense of routine and discipline with respect to their physical activity and mental health. It doesn't have to be like as structured as that with respect to the social element. Like it could be that a group of your young person and just gets together with a bunch of friends. They might say, I don't know, go to the footy or just go out, and then on the way home have a kick of the footy and just be generally active when they go out. So there are a multitude of ways to achieve that same thing. It doesn't have to be in that very sort of structured way.
Right. Now, is there any more questions? If we'll give sort of another minute. If anyone's got any last questions, you can plug them into the Q&A section.
While we wait for any final questions to pop through, if it's okay, Sheree, we might have a look at the resources slide, perhaps. Would that be something we could do?
Yep, I'll just share my screen again.
Thank you so much for that, Sheree. So just to kind of wrap up, we wanted to pass on just some recommended resources that we you will have heard a lot of the content that's within these resources covered in this webinar, but there's also some other really interesting information. And the book that we would recommend would be Brainstorm, which is by Dan Siegel, who's provided a lot of content for our webinar tonight. So thank you to Dan Siegel. It's a really interesting read to kind of unpack what's going on inside of the teenage brain and how that's actually a really exciting time of development. We've also just got some recommendations for some websites and helplines. There's Parent Line that you can contact either over the phone or through the web. We have Kids Helpline, who are always happy to speak with young people, but they're also able to speak to and have a lot of resources for the people who are caring for young people. And finally, Reach Out Australia has a fantastic website that has a whole lot of articles and information about the adolescent years and different kind of changes and challenges that young people might be experiencing.
Right. Thank you for that, Jess. Yeah, some really good resources there. Probably one final question. Yeah, this will be this has been recorded, this webinar, so we'll get this uploaded up onto to our YouTube channel, I believe. So you keep an eye on that. That will go up in the coming days. So you're welcome to watch that back whenever you like. So we might wrap it up there. I'm conscious of time, and everyone might be out having dinner and wrapping up for the night. But thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Isabel, Jess, and Sheree for putting this together. Hopefully you're able to get a bit more of an insight into how your child's brain might be working at the moment, and a few little strategies you might be able to take away to assist with their ongoing development. We know that this time in their lives is it's an always changing one, but it's one that's also excited with a lot of positive opportunities as well. But as we know, coming the last few years of schooling, it does get stressful, and there's a lot of things that can pop up in our lives. So so that's why these webinars were created, to try and support you in their ongoing journey through their last years of schooling. So looking at our upcoming webinars, so we'll send this out over sector and through SMS. So on the 27th of March, on Monday, we got one on sleep, and also the 22nd of May on managing exam stress. So so we'll be putting that together. Hopefully you can join us for next time. If you ever want to engage, if you have any other questions, you're welcome to reach out to myself, David, or one of the psychologists, and we're also available for meetings or appointments as you need as well. We're here to support you and your child in their journey while they're at Sydenham. So thank you, everyone. We'll hold it there, and hope you have a good rest of your night. And thanks, everyone, for joining. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.